Good afternoon, Robert Phoenix here, broadcasting to you live from Flyover State. It is Good Friday. It is the last, talking about, let's see, second to last day this month. And we have the moon in Virgo, getting ready to go full tomorrow in Libra. And of course, we have the slightly waning full moon on Sunday with Easter and April Fool's Day, all happening simultaneously. Very, very rare confluence. And hopefully, you know, from a spiritual perspective, can we have peace in our time? I'm not sure if it's possible. I mean, unless something completely out of the blue that the global handlers, the mechanics of the matrix, haven't figured out yet or haven't used CERN or whatever technology at their disposal to reroute some level of awakening or some event which turns their world upside down. I'm not necessarily sure. We talk a little bit about that on today's show with Steve and Krys Crimi, who joined me today. It's an interview I recorded yesterday, and much longer than we normally go for. It's around an hour and 27 minutes long, so it's going to be it's almost a 2-hour show today. But it's a really great conversation, and the format is that Krys decided that she wanted to use a piece from Nietzsche and Thus Spake Zarathustra, and it's about the state, and it's when Zarathustra talks about the overman and talks about liberation and freedom as it relates to the state, which is this soul-crushing entity that we empower and give consent to, and that's inside of the passage or the chapters that we're going to go through. So the format is Krys is reading pieces of the state, and we're riffing off of them, and it's a really interesting conversation. And we bring in a lot of contemporary phenomena, particularly the Q phenomena, the QAnon phenomena, and what's happening in Q world, which is crazy at this point. You've got dueling anons, you have Thomas Paine, Tom and Betsy Ross, or whatever their names are, who are ex-NSA, and they're outing Q. They know who Q is. That Q doesn't exist anymore. The Q that started to bring the anonymous messages and codes and symbols on 4chan is no longer the same entity doing it. I mean, a lot of this is taking place right now, and I never put a lot of stock in QAnon, only because it's not something that I thought was entirely all that provable, although people have been arduously compiling information on the outer plane that could somehow relate to the data, and it's really symbolic data code that they're receiving theoretically on the inner plane from Q, who's taken on an almost messiah-like quality, digital avatar, an avatar. And it's not just Q; it's Mega Anon, and then we have Arthur. So we talk about this phenomenon. I mean, not in a major capacity, but we do touch on it, and I think it's an important conversation. Before I launch into the recorded interview today, Just wanted to give you some updates around what's happening with March for Our Lives. Laura Ingraham, who works for Fox, took issue and has taken issue to David Hogg. And she basically said that David Hogg has been turned down by 3 separate colleges. And that is some degree or measure of his inability to actually cope with the real world, be in the real world. And all hell is broken loose. And Laura Ingraham is probably going to have to apologize, maybe step down from Fox. And this is one of Fox's heavy hitters, because now there are companies who are boycotting Laura Ingraham because she spoke out against Lord Hogg. You want to know what the list of those companies are? Give me 1 second, I'll find them. One moment in time. Expedia is one of them. Wayfair is another. Here we go. Let me get to you. There it is. So we have Expedia, we have Wayfair, we have TripAdvisory. Here we go. Nestle, Wayfair, TripAdvisor, Expedia. And they are boycotting Laura Ingraham. Yeah. I'm beginning to think that David Hogg might be the Antichrist. I'm beginning to think that he and his zeta reticulin hybrid synthesis might be the Antichrist. Kid's untouchable. He's bulletproof. If we're going to have any way of getting through what happened on February 14th in Parkland, Florida, and the aftermath, there's going to have to be a major investigation into the background of David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez. When I say major investigation, I'm not talking by any standard means. I'm talking people that are really gifted at uncovering deep, deep information that you can't get on background check services like Been Verified or Intellus, which I use. You can find stuff on their parents. You can certainly find some interesting things on Kevin Hogg, but there's nothing on David and there's nothing on Emma. And I think that's where this needs to go. And I would, if I was Jeff Bezos and I had basically billions of dollars of FU money, I would certainly offer up a small ransom, to hire somebody, even if it was illegal, to go in and hack and figure out who this kid is, who Emma Gonzalez is, what their educational background is, what their birth dates are. Now, one of the things that could happen, and might have already happened, is that if they are really tied into deep state at a very high level, and if David Hogg is this sleeper who has been groomed for this role for a number of years, which I believe he has, then there's a very good possibility that his records have been either expunged or altered. You know, we could be looking at another kind of version of Obama in terms of being able to get, you know, the real data, the real info. So it's going to be very, very hard, I think, to figure out, you know, what they have in their background. Not impossible, but I think certainly there'd be some hurdles and even some fail-safe measures that have been enacted by the alphabet agencies or the people that really want to push this through. Because they wouldn't make mistakes that egregiously, right? It wouldn't be that ostentatious. It would almost be, I mean, if we did find some discrepancy quite easily, it would almost be one of these things that would kind of lead us off the path. But nonetheless, I would still put out a small ransom in order to find out what's really lurking in their backgrounds. Another way that we could disassemble what happened in Parkland is to try to go back into the event itself. While I'm not a huge fan of Jim Fetzer, I can barely stand listening to him. And I think he piggybacks on a lot of other people's work, and I think he basically operates in an echo chamber and is able to convince people that the research that he is finding and has uncovered is his own, and that is seldom the case. But anyway, there are two bits of information that Fetzer has, how should we say, synthesized. One is that there is a national database of obituaries, and it is a pretty comprehensive database. And not one of the so-called 17 people in Parkland shows up in the database. You would think that at the very least 3 or 4 might be an outlier, but none of them show up in this database. And we're talking, this event happened on February 14th. We're coming up on 2 months, and usually obituaries are written 2 to 3 days after somebody has passed away. Maybe 5 to 7 days on the outside. And not one person from Parkland has an obituary. The other thing that Fetzer has uncovered has to do with the fact that there is a chance that the people, and I'm not talking about Nicholas Cruz. Nicholas Cruz didn't squeeze a trigger on this event. That whoever was inside the school, who was ever dressed up in full body armor, that they were actually firing something called simunition, which is ammunition that is simulated. It's like firing a blank cartridge. However, apparently with simunition, if it hits you, it will bounce off your skin and create a cut or a nick or a graze. So it looks like you've been nicked by bullets, when in actuality you've been hit directly by the simunition. And if this is the case, then there's a good chance that nobody in Parkland died. So it's another piece that's worth examining. The problem here is that the mainstream media is controlling the narrative and has controlled the narrative around these events and conspiracies for life. It's funny, when they want to have a conspiracy like Russia, they're more than willing to create a conspiracy. Not just create a conspiracy, but keep it alive, explore it. So they're not immune to conspiracy. But if there's a conspiracy that fits their paradigm, their agenda, their narrative, they're all in. But if there's a conspiracy that exposes their paradigm, their agenda, their narrative, then it just remains crazy, tinfoil, whack-ass conspiracy. So the challenge now is to get above the decibel level, to get above the noise. And I think it's a real challenge. And one of the challenges is because David Hogg, Emma Gonzalez, Cameron Kasky, Delaney Tarr, Deitch, they're all human shields. They're human shields. They're human shields for the absolute destruction of the Constitution and the First and the Second Amendment. It's a brilliant plan, absolutely brilliant in its evil genius. And that's why we need to really deal with this from an asymmetrical level. This thing has got to be asymmetric. Because if you go right after the kids, I've got a very, very small podcast. You know, at the very most, I might have 1,000 people listen to this podcast. So by and large, I'm not going to be on any significant radar. Now, who knows? Maybe somebody, hopefully not me, knock on wood, or nobody else, because they go after the whales, right? The Alex Joneses and the Richie Allens, whoever, they go after the whales. I'm clearly not a whale. And I don't have sponsors. I don't take any money from YouTube. I don't have any sponsors. So there's no sponsor conflict. The only thing that I have is I have a relationship with PayPal and I have a relationship with clients. Now, this may scare off some clients. They may think it's, you know, a little hardcore, a little edgy. Maybe some people might even view it as hate speech. It's not. What I'm trying to do, to the best of my ability, is to crack open and keep this discussion alive about what really happened in Parkland, who these kids are, who are behind them, and where the discrepancies are. And I'm trying to do it in the most respectful way possible. At some point, if things go too far, I will turn up the volume. And I'll turn up the volume without losing my patience. Because we're at a real precipice here. We're at a turning point. We're at a major turning point. And astrologically, we've got Chiron in Aries, Uranus in Taurus, and these major changes are happening. Chiron in Aries. That's the last time we had Chiron in Aries was 1969. It was the birth of the Weather Underground. It was the Wounded Warriors coming back from Vietnam. It was one of the most explosive and unstable periods in American history. The summer of 1969. We're right there. We're right there with Chiron going back into Aries. So I just wanted to give you the latest on that and some of the headlines that are circulating. And not just circulating, but really looking at the impact of speaking out and against these cloistered and protected figureheads for the anti-gun movement in the United States circa 2018. All right, so with that little bit of news out of the way, let's get into today's discussion and what I'd call the mind jam, the brain jam that took place yesterday between me and Steve and Krys. It's a great conversation. Hang in there. It's long, but there's some real nuggets that you'll be able to chew on. Let's put it that way. And I think it's really reflective of this dynamic of exploration and seeking the truth in a time where doing that can be challenging, to say the least, and could also have dire consequences in terms of how it's perceived and the consequences that surround that. All right, let's get into it. So here is myself and Steve and Krys Crimi from yesterday, and we're about to jump into The States by Nietsche. I'll be back. Well, it's the end of the month again, and it is almost exactly the end of the month, and this is a time when we bring Steve and Krys Crimi back onto the show. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello, Robert. Hello, Robert. Thank you so much for having us.
Nice.
My pleasure. Hey, it seems like this last month has taken a long time to get here. I don't know why. Maybe that's just me, but it feels longer than a month. Does it feel like that to you at all?
A whole life in between those.
No, and nothing happened this past month.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really dead space out there. Wouldn't it be great if we had a month where nothing happened?
Yeah. Where all you did was roam around the garden.
Yeah. I always thought that if we ever really wanted to change the world in a significant way, that it would have to do with doing nothing. That if we all just stayed home for about a month.
Oh my God, everything come to a screeching halt.
Screeching halt. Do nothing for change.
Wouldn't have to lift a finger.
Absolutely. They come running to us. Oh, please, please, please. Come back out. Buy our products.
Mm-hmm.
I loved hearing on your, I guess it was yesterday's show, this morning, that you had a big garden, that you were a big fan of gardening.
Yeah, so that was an interesting time. I was living in Albany, which is a little tiny town in California right next to Berkeley. Little tiny place, Albany, California. And my ex-wife, at the time we were married, said, wouldn't it be a great idea to start a garden for you and our son? I'm like, okay, sounds great. Well, I couldn't just start a garden. I kind of really went for it.
Good.
And I got into beefing up the soil. Everything was either organic seed or organic sprouts. And I actually, we had, it's one of those old kind of 1940 style homes where the driveways are like 2 strips of concrete. Mm-hmm. And then there's a little center where there's like grass or dirt or whatever. So along our wall of that driveway, we had a big yellow wall. And there was a little kind of runner of dirt between that and the cement strip for the driveway. And I thought to myself, this would be a great place to grow some corn. Corn. Yes. Wow. So I went out and I got little yellow and white corn seedlings, and I grew corn along this wall, and it was stunning. It was people would walk by and take pictures of the corn on the wall, grown against the wall, and I knew that my marriage was in jeopardy when my now ex said, I want you to take that corn down. It looks really white trashy. Ooh. And I thought to myself, this is not going to go well.
Wow.
Yeah. Ouch. So needless to say, the corn stayed up. Because people loved it. And they were walking by, looking at it. It's like, wow, how often do you see corn growing along the side of a house?
Right.
So that was great. I loved it. I just have not had the time to get back into the garden. I know you two are big gardeners.
Oh, big.
Yeah, when we had the farm, I think it was a Canadian variety of corn we grew one year that went up like 15 feet high.
It was insane.
Yeah, I have some pictures of it. Of it. And I think was that the year. Then we had a horse, this like
really old horse,
30-year-old horse,
really old donkey.
Yeah, and she broke in and ate our corn.
God bless her.
The majestic 15-foot stalks were no match for
right. But I was wondering, isn't there a little place where you could do a community garden? Get a plot?
Could be. Where I live, there's actually a big patch of grass just outside my door. Now, I don't think it's inside the apartment complex. I don't think that they would be open to me creating a garden there. Well, you never know, but I think so. I think I might be able to find something. We have great farmers markets out here, so I'm looking forward to that in the springtime as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, people have this bizarre notion, going back to what you said about the corn, and even my mother at the time we were living, we had an apartment on top of my parents' house when we first got married. And Krys was like planting vegetables in the front yard. And it was a cul-de-sac. It was not like a traffic place, and everyone's thinking like it's bringing down the property values to have a vegetable in the front of the yard.
I don't think it's a good idea to have those sunflowers out there.
What is that? What triggers that in people? Is it like this like lingering sense that only people that are poor grow vegetables and people that are well off can afford them and buy them?
I like to think that the disconnect is complete. That's how I look at it. It's that the disconnect is such that people no longer can see what's in front of themselves. They see an idea in their head. And it's an idea that's been put there by someone else. It didn't, that you don't look at a beautiful plant and think that's a bad thing, right? Someone told you that.
Yeah, and you had to learn it because, my mom grew up and her, everyone back then, it was in Brooklyn, everyone had backyard gardens. All the Italians, they grew tomatoes, they grew squash, they grew eggplant. And in fact, my grandfather even made his own wine,
Really?
Great way to keep the kids quiet at Thanksgiving. Everyone would get a little glass of wine to sip on, and we'd be all sacked out.
Right.
He was like the first person to have a color TV, as I recall.
Interesting.
I think this really loops back into what we wanted to talk about today. We were going to talk about Friedrich Nietzsche.
Right. The state.
And his writing on the state.
Yeah.
And so, where do those kinds of ideas come from?
Let's get into it.
Implanted in us by this big monster of a system, and these ideas are not original to human beings. Human beings love plants and they love nature. So somehow, somewhere, this diabolical idea came into people's minds, not into their hearts, but into their minds, that you can't grow sunflowers in the front yard. That's white trashy, or corn along your driveway. That's low rent. So I was remembering this week about Nietzsche's writings on this essay that he did called The New Idol, IDOL. And I thought, so he's talking about the state. And it was, I will give credit to my yoga teacher from New York, who at the time told me about this essay, and I had never read Nietzsche. And when I read this, my head exploded because I was working for New York State at the time. I worked there 31 years, and I was third generation working there.
Wow.
And so I knew the state from the inside, and I knew what it was like, and I knew how that aspect of it worked. So when I read this essay, it was just like I found Jesus. I was telling everybody about this, and you need to read this. And so I thought it'd be a good thing to go into. And what we'd like to do is we just printed out one section of it where Zarathustra comes into this village, and the people are all gathered together because there's a tightrope walker in town. And they're all in anticipation of the show. And so he takes advantage of the situation, and he inserts himself into the middle of it, so that he walks into the middle of the ring and the people think that he is the ringmaster. So he's like, great, I have a captive audience. I will start to speak. So he starts to talk to them. So this thing, the new idol, he calls it, what came to me was we idolize the state. We put it up on a pedestal, and we put it on a position that it doesn't deserve. And really what it is, it's like going against the edict of not having false gods before me. I shall have no false gods before me. We've done this. We've put the state in this godlike position where we worship whatever it says and are very obedient to every word that we're told. So he's saying somewhere there are still peoples and herds, but not with us, my brothers. Here there are states. So the somewhere to me is this kind of a dreamy, non-specific place that we've heard about. It's almost like in Brave New World. There's like that outside the borders. There's that wild land, right? Where people still have the original people. So somewhere there are still, we've heard, there are these peoples and herds, like it's like Eden, like in Edenic before the fall.
Right.
But not with us, my brothers. Here there are states. So he's setting the stage where we are not, that's not us. We've already, the disconnect is complete. We've had that severance from.
Right.
So then he says, the state, what is that? Well, now open your ears to me, for now I will speak to you about the death of peoples. And what that says to me is that the death of the original cultures, so the tribal man, the sovereign nations, before this whole one world order kind of thing came in.
Mm-hmm.
State is the name of the coldest of the cold monsters. Coldly it lies, and this lie slips from its mouth. I, the state, am the people.
Mm.
So people have really bought into that idea that, well, we live in a democracy, it's we the people are really ruling the country, and we have our elected officials. But that's been co-opted. That's a lie.
Right.
That's the big lie.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so in yoga, what you would say is that's avidya, it's non-knowledge. It's taking the unreal for the real.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the basic mistake. In yoga, that's where you start.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lie. It was creators who created peoples and hung a faith and a love over them. Thus, they serve life. Destroyers are they who lay snares for the many and call it state. They hang a sword and 100 cravings over them. And this is where Steve often, makes a statement like the state it's like a death cult, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just, we operate on war and killing
but also the sword and the 100 cravings, of course. So they have us ping-ponging between fear and desire.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that's that's their loosh, that's their food. But that's how they keep us back and forth, aversion and attraction.
Yeah, it was funny. You should bring that up. I was answering a question today to somebody on Facebook, and he asked me, why is there such a resurgence of 80s and 90s TV shows and music that are being played on commercials? And I thought it was an interesting question. Mm-hmm. And the only two TV shows that I could think of that were being reanimated were Roseanne and Will and Grace. And Roseanne has now been cast in the mold of this kind of Trumpian MAGA character. Like, that's her character now. She's a right winger. She's not a liberal. She's not a radical. She's not part of the social Marxist trend. And then, of course, Will and Grace, firmly planted on the left side of this left-right piece. But then I thought about the music part. Like, well, why are they going back and referencing music from the 80s and the 90s? And this gets to what you just brought up, Steve, which is about desire and fear. And I said this, I said, well, commercials are based on envy and fear. And so you're either envious of somebody that has something that you don't, whether it's good looks or a car or whatever that is. And so you want that thing. And then the other is fear, which is security. But why would the music play a role in that? Well, the music, I think, is this bed of nostalgia that allows people to access something in another place and time if they make a commercial decision or choice. So, for instance, let's say they're playing a song by the Thompson Twins, and it's Hold Me Now. And it's a commercial for diapers. I don't even know if they have diaper commercials anymore. But it's like all of a sudden it's like, okay, Hold Me Now, Thompson Twins, baby diaper, boom. Right? Or on the other side, Girls on Film. And it happens to be like Revlon or something. You make that decision, boom. And I thought about this. It's like it's been around for a long time. I remember back in the 70s, they would do the same thing with 1950s music.
Exactly.
Right? Mm-hmm. Because they would trigger a sense of nostalgia. And by making a consumer-based choice, you would do one of two things. You would either stave off Father Time, which is the envy piece, right? Or you would stave off death, which is the fear piece. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think this is an apparatus of the state, or the commercial apparatus of the state.
Yeah, so, and I think what the and to add on to what you're saying is that probably the people who are designing these things for them, so 20 years earlier, that was their music when they were teenagers.
Right.
That's right.
Just like I get nostalgic whenever I hear, God Save the Queen.
Right. Right there with you, man.
the fascist regime, she made you a moron, potential H-bomb. No one writes, soothing, gorgeous lyrics like that anymore.
No, best record of all time, no doubt. Never mind the bollocks.
So that was when I was I guess that would have been my senior year in high school that came out.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't quite tuned into it. I was listening to Kansas or The Who at the time, I guess.
I was a junior in 1976 when that record came out.
Okay.
And I remember the first time I heard it, it was, I can't even describe it. It was like Elvis and Led Zeppelin and David Bowie all rolled up into one record. That's what it was like for me. It's like that was the record I've been waiting for my entire life.
And they famously, they just like toured Texas, right? Wasn't that their first tour?
First and last tour.
Sex Pistols. We haven't even mentioned them yet, but you're talking about the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, and first and last tour.
They were throwing bottles at them. And,
it was classic. And then the band imploded. I mean, it's the best rock and roll story of all time. Yeah,
Johnny Lydon's still around. But
he is still around. And you know what? I saw him about a month ago. Apparently, Jay Leno has a show on cars. And so there are people that don't know how to drive. And Jay Leno helps them learn how to drive. And Johnny Lydon was on the show. And Jay Leno was teaching him how to drive.
That's fun.
And one of Jay Leno's cars, it'll start off in a Lamborghini or something.
Yeah, I don't think it was that advanced, but I thought, isn't this fascinating? With Mr. Punk Rock, just learning how to drive now. Interesting. Well, let's keep going with this. This is great. Yeah.
And just this one more thing before Chris starts, and that's another thing. But everything gets co-opted because by 78, they're coming down the fashion runway with with safety pins, through the.
Oh yeah, Vivienne Westwood hit Fashion Week, right? That's what happened.
Yeah, so everything gets co-opted and commodified.
Yep.
And Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Janice Joplin. All right, where there are still peoples, and these are the original peoples, right? The tribal peoples.
Hold on, before we go on, really quickly, I want to ask one question, and I want to throw this out to the two of you. Who do you think Nietzsche means by it was the creators? What does he mean by that?
There was a plural there. I noticed that. I kind of glossed over it, but I did have a little,
I haven't read enough Nietzsche.
It was creators who created people in the plural. That's a good catch.
Whether he was kind of,
I don't know.
Because he had a whole Dionysian, Apollonian thing going on. Whether he was, something of a pagan. I always understood his death of God, and of course, his whole idea of the death of God was. I don't think he was necessarily an atheist, but I think God as an operative force in our lives was dead at that point.
As as the pristine state.
Yeah, I mean, God is dead in religion now. God is dead, in everything that he even talks about God. There is no God operative as an aspect of our life.
Right. Yeah,
So
I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, that's how
it's
I
all
took
back
that.
to the idea in your head. Like God is an idea.
So whether so I don't know what he means by plural. I'll just flat out say that.
I wonder if it's like the creators as like, the Nephilim or
right. I think that's
the Anunnaki or something like that.
Or maybe each peoples have their own creation story and their own creation.
That's a possibility.
I can definitely roll with that.
Because I think later on he does say something that would indicate that that's the case. That when we get to that, we'll recognize it.
Yeah, I just couldn't let go of that plural of creators.
Good catch.
Yeah.
Okay, where there are still peoples, the state is not understood. They just don't get it. It's like, what? We're just living our lives. Mm-hmm. What is this? It's an imposition on our lives, the state.
Yeah.
And it is hated as the evil eye and as sin against laws and customs. About the original laws, like in Greece, those original laws were given in the state of incubation to those pre-Socratics who were like yogis. They would go into the cave and lie down and do their incubation meditation, and the deity would come in and bring the laws in, and then that person would come back and relay that to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a sin against those laws,
Right.
the original laws and customs, not state imposed.
Right.
This sign I give to you. Every people speaks its own language of good and evil, which its neighbor does not necessarily understand. It has created its own language of laws and customs. So each tribal unit has their recognition of what is lawful for them. But the state lies in all the tongues of good and evil. And whatever it says lies. And whatever it has stolen. Which made me think of this, the Native Americans and then any of the indigenous peoples. They have been trampled by the state because of who they are, because what they represent is the original truth. Mm-hmm. And because this is a lie, it can't let them live.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we obliterate the native peoples, mm-hmm. wherever they are. Yep. Everything in it is false. It bites with stolen teeth and bites often. It is false down to its bowels. Confusion of tongues of good and evil, this sign I give you as the sign of the state. This sign points to the will to death. It points to the preachers of death. All too many are born, for the superfluous the state was created. So he talks a lot about the superfluous ones. And so, we can all kind of come together and figure out what he means by the superfluous ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, superfluous to me is meaningless, right? There's no meaning. Like they're expendable. Superfluous is expendable.
What's Kissinger's line?
Well, I'm getting to that. And that's really, we had a little conversation around breakfast time when we were going over and making notes, but okay. Kissinger comes up. See how it entices them to it, the all too many, how it swallows and chews and re-chews them. On earth, there is nothing greater than I. I am the governing hand of God. Thus roars the monster. Talk about hubris. And not only the long-eared and the short-sighted fall upon their knees. So then that really brought to mind the useless eaters. Remember that Henry Kissinger? Mm-hmm. And so we did a little search on that to find out, did he really say that? I mean, did he actually really say that phrase that the superfluous ones are useless eaters? So it seems that it was a quote from Woodward and Bernstein put it in their book, The Final Days. Mm-hmm. And it's from the National Security Memorandum number 200 in 1974, right. That Kissinger actually said useless eaters, and that the elderly are useless eaters, and the world population needs to be decreased by 50%. And the zinger, mm-hmm. Soldiers are dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns for foreign policy.
Yeah, that quote is making the rounds now on the internet. It? Excuse me, that last part about soldiers being dumb.
I hadn't heard it.
Yeah, that's making the rounds.
That's
and it's
stunning.
Yeah, well, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, I guess there are some. Yeah, I mean, there are some intimations that Trump has been in contact with Kissinger.
He visits the White House.
So that's what I call a VBS, very bad sign. And so that's a possibility. And who is it? Well, Jerome. Well, and I'm not sure the source, but apparently it's possible that Jerome Corsi has said, "Oh, well, Kissinger is turned is now a white hat," and that would. I don't think any greater transformation would be possible. I guess somewhere in me, I have to allow for the possibility, But
the only thing I could think of is that maybe Kissinger is finally beginning to rub up against his mortality. And sometimes when people get to that point, no matter what kind of deals they've made, they somehow try to make good. But I don't know. I'd find that very hard to believe.
And maybe whatever, and maybe his the food that's been keeping alive this long is running low.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Maybe the sources are drying up.
I would hope.
So this is a really interesting image of the state. And it is, thus roars the monster, I am the governing hand of God. It's like state is Leviathan. This is kind of, what I'm getting from that line. Thus roars the monster.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it also goes back to this, a really early deception, the divine right of kings.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Talk about self-fulfilling, I don't know if prophecy, self-fulfilling structure anyway. Divine right of kings. This is the way God ordained the world to be set up.
Right.
Here, you down there.
Right.
And the argument of the United States being established as a Christian nation, I don't see that in the writings. In fact, wasn't it Jefferson who was very careful about that and had big red flags on that issue? So
they were all Freemasons and Rosicrucians, right. So Freemasonic country.
And felt that the separation of church and state was vital to an open society.
Right.
Right. That's my understanding of it.
It's true. Absolutely.
But that's the claim is, now that's the refrain that you hear is that we're a Christian nation. That's not all inclusive to me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We had a little conversation we were at a wedding in Alabama over the weekend, and with one of the relatives who was down there was kept on touting that, what's wrong with a little religion in the schools?
Right.
And, which is fine as long as it's my religion,
Yeah. You can't, that's you're just looking for trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we were supposed to be more edgy. We don't want to be.
We were too nice. Which Robert said we were too nice.
Yeah, no, I think we have to have more animus towards one another, right? That's a bunch of crap. Eat your crap.
What's talking about?
You call that analysis? You call that analysis?
One important thing that I wanted to point out is now, because the state and the corporations are so alike and they've been so entangled, you want to talk entanglement?
Yeah.
For me now, when I talk about the state, I have to feel like it's the corporate state.
Absolutely.
So I think that's just an important thing to keep in the back of your head.
I don't think you can separate out the product, distribution, disbursement, marketing of corporations and an agenda or a goal that's connected to the advancement of the state. I think they're tied at the hip now. They're just no.
I think they're one, and I think the extrication would be almost death to the patient at this point. I'd
like to try it.
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
We could die happy anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So where are we now?
Even in your ears, you great souls, it whispers its gloomy lies. It finds out the rich hearts which willingly squander themselves.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, you willingly give up your freedom. Yeah. Please save me. Even if you are someone who sees through it, people who even see through the system with the fear mongering have willingly given up their freedom. Please, you willingly squander yourself.
Yep.
And it's a sacrifice to the state.
It is.
Yes, it finds you too, you conquerors of the old God. You became weary of conflict. Now your weariness serves the new idol.
It's about being run down.
It just grinds you down.
That's right.
Grinds you down.
Yeah.
It would set up heroes and honorable ones around it, the new idol. Gladly it basks in the sunshine of good consciences. Did I say that right? Yes, consciences. The cold monster.
Yeah. The cold monster.
Yeah, well, I like that. The sunshine of good consciences. Think about the whole last weekend, everyone going on the marches and, and so many people thinking they're doing the right thing. And this is good consciences going on there.
It will give everything to you if you worship it, the new idol. Thus it buys the luster of your virtue and the glance of your proud eyes. Through you, It seeks to seduce the all too many. Yes, a hellish artifice has been created here, a death horse, jingling with the trappings of divine honors. So it's a death cult that's glorifying war and the anti-initiation into the cult itself. Mm-hmm. That's what war is. That was a recognition that Steve had some time ago, that this is all an anti-initiation, this military activity for the state. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to lump in the true warriors into that. I wouldn't lump them into that category. They're a class above. Those true protectors and the true warriors do deserve the honors. Mm-hmm. But what ends up happening is that whole honorable state is co-opted by the false state.
Yeah.
Yes, a dying for many has been created here, which glorifies itself as life. Verily, a great service to all preachers of death. Which made me think of Gurdjieff's talk about being food for the moon, how war and strife and killing and bloodletting, it all feeds this lower chakra, food for the moon, this whole thing with the gory blood of war. Mm-hmm. It's food, it's louche.
And it's and the thing is, it's made to seem, this romantic, they've romanticized. I mean, that's been going on for the longest time. I guess that's how you get people to fight wars. You romanticize.
Absolutely. You romanticize it. You strike a chord of patriotism or whatever is going to sell the war. Absolutely. I do think in some instances people have to fight for their land and their territory. And I don't think you have to really sell war at that level. But yeah, for the most part, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Especially the young people who, their hormones are at their height and they're just so, wanting to do the right thing and serve their country. And they're just easy picking. It's like low-hanging fruit for this.
Absolutely.
And what, and it really comes across in this, and he doesn't state it explicitly, is that the state is a fiction. It's a generated fiction.
It's a construct.
And
it can be deconstructed.
So who's generating the construct? Is it us? Are we generating the construct?
Well, we keep it. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We keep it going, don't we?
Where's the original generation coming from? Right. Where's the original projection coming from?
David Icke would say the spider in the middle of the web. I did have a really great dream about a spider in the White House.
Really?
A couple of months ago. I woke up and it was just one of those early morning dreams. I was in the Obama White House and I was in a particular room and there were this one wall was the focus. And it was a white wall with white bookshelves, but they were empty. Mm-hmm. And up in the top corner was this huge black spider.
Did it have Valerie Jarrett's head on it?
No. Help me. But that was the dream. Nothing else about it, but it was the Obama White House.
Interesting.
Spider. Huge, big black spider, like a big tarantula. I don't remember. But anyway.
Wow.
Okay, the state, I call it, where all drink poison, the good and the bad. The state where all lose themselves, the good and the bad. The state where the slow suicide of all is called life. And I thought, yeah, chemtrails, pharmaceuticals, GMOs, slow suicide.
Right. And
suicide because the people as a whole have not risen up against it. So we're complicit in a way. Even those of us who try to speak out are ineffectual because there aren't enough of us saying as a one unit, this needs to stop.
Yeah. You shop at Walmart, you're complicit.
Yeah. Well, we buy from Amazon, we're complicit. It's like
I sent something back to Amazon the other day. I was actually happy I did that. But you're absolutely right. And the way it's set up is, in some instances, there's no other option.
I agree.
Exactly.
And by design.
And that's by design.
That's by design.
Yeah.
We did show, when we had the farm, we used to show movies in the barn. and we showed the Walmart movie, The High Cost of Low Price.
Uh-huh.
And they just showed how they would go through a town where they planned on putting a Walmart, and they would just drive by and they'd be laughing and they'd say, see that little general store there? 6 months, that'll be gone. You see that little mom and pop store there? 6 months, haha, that'll be gone. So every little town had its hub where you could get the essentials. And then they just wiped them completely off the map.
Right.
Deliberate.
So, and where you are, I think you said that they disallow box stores, at least within the town limits.
Yeah, so outside of the town, slowly the box lots have begun to emerge. Walmart is here, Ace Hardware is here, Lowe's or Home Depot or not, and then apparently there's a Whole Foods coming in. That'll be open sometime in the fall. So slowly this area is changing, but it's changing at the periphery. It's not changing on, sort of in the limits within the city, which they're trying to keep as intact as they can for all their tourist trade.
That happened in Nashville to a certain extent, but they're encroaching, and the big hotels are the problem here.
Yeah.
All right. So behold the superfluous. They steal the works of the creators and the treasures of the wise. They co-opt everything. Education, they call their theft.
Yeah.
And everything becomes sickness and trouble to them. Now everything is an illness to the pharmaceutical companies.
Good point.
Everything becomes sickness.
Right, grief. Right on the what's the psychological the big book of diagnoses. The
DSM.
DSM. Right. Grief was they were trying to get that in as an illness.
Right.
So they can medicate it.
Yep.
Freaking grief.
Behold the superfluous, they are always sick. They vomit their bile and call it a newspaper. They devour each other and cannot even digest themselves.
I like that one.
And I remember that Gurdjieff also held journalism to be the lowest form of writing. He had contempt for journalists. Behold the superfluous. They acquire wealth and become the poorer for it. They seek power and the lever of power, much money, these impotent ones. See them clamber, these nimble apes. They clamber over one another and thus pull each other into the mud and the abyss. They all strive for the throne. This is their madness, as if happiness sat on the throne. Often filth sits on the throne, and often also the throne on filth. That made me think of Trump's pledge to drain the swamp with the filth. It's sitting on filth at the moment.
That's right. Yep.
Madmen they all seem to me, and clambering apes, and too eager. Foul smells their idol to me, the cold monster. Foul they all smell to me, these idolaters. So this is false god worship again.
So they all smell like Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, can you imagine? My brothers, you will suffocate in the fumes of their maws and appetites. Better to break the windows and jump into the open air. Escape from their foul stench. Escape from the idolatry of the superfluous. So the superfluous, again, being those people who have been marginalized and had education pulled from their purview. Mm-hmm. And so in their ignorance, in their state of avidya, which is the yogic terminology, non-knowledge, taking the unreal for the real, they think that the state is going to protect them. Escape from their foul stench. Escape from the steam of these human sacrifices. Mm. Now I'm thinking that's not only figurative, but as we've been learning, it's also literal.
Absolutely.
The earth is yet free for great souls. So there are those who can still see and know. There are still many empty sites for the lonesome and the twosome, surrounded by the fragrance of tranquil seas. So for the person who really wants to, you can still find this original state of Eden. Mm-hmm. Okay. A free life is yet possible for the great souls. who possesses little is that much less possessed. Blessed be a little poverty. So if you can't afford all the new smart appliances, that poverty is going to benefit you.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I've been listening to a lot of old Bill Cooper broadcasts from his. Do you guys ever listen to any of his stuff on the little ham radio broadcasts? Interesting. You know Bill Cooper, right? He wrote "Behold a Pale Horse." Are you familiar with him?
No, I get him confused with the guy who jumped out of the airplane with the
D.B.
ransom.
Cooper, right? Yeah, it's easy to do. Bill Cooper was an interesting character. Showed up around 1989. I found him in 1990, right after the Gulf War had started, and he I heard him on a radio station. I was working in Olympia at a restaurant. I was at a early shift coming in for kind of a breakfast deal, and he was on a local radio station. He was being interviewed, and he was talking about stuff in the context of the Gulf War that I had been uncovering. It was a real accelerated period of awakening for me. And so I found out he was going to be at Evergreen College that weekend. So I got some tickets and went there. There were probably about 1,500 people. And he put out Behold a Pale Horse, and that was his first and only book. It's a strange compendium of a lot of interesting sort of conspiratorial pieces. Anyway, Bill Cooper eventually gained some momentum and some traction. But the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because he often talked about being poor, and he often talked about how he didn't have any money, and he was trying to get this message out to the people, and then he would basically make this analogy that somehow by doing this work of truth, that it was God's work, and that he could be provided for. And to some extent, I think that sort of happened, although he was always, kind of 2 steps away from the poorhouse. But it's a similar kind of philosophy that he was espousing. Like he was choosing this on purpose. And there is this one period of time when he and Alex Jones were occupying the same space. And it's a really interesting little footnote in this history, because Alex Jones had been influenced by Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper comes and he's on Alex Jones's show. And then after the show, Alex Jones starts ripping Bill Cooper. And you go back and you can listen to Bill Cooper's response. And this is 1999. And he just completely rips Alex Jones a new asshole. It's really, yeah, it's really fascinating. Anyway, this talk about having less just took me back into Bill Cooper land, and some of the stuff that Bill Cooper talked about was actually very prescient. He talked about how they would use kids specifically to come for the guns. And he was talking about this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the late 90s. Yeah, I know. Cooper was on to some stuff. I mean, he was really bright. He had 4 planets in Gemini. He was a Taurus. And he has this whole series called Mystery Babylon. And he's worth checking out. I mean, he's also, when you get into this realm, rarely do you have, people that are on the edge and really polished statesmen. And, Bill had some rough edges. And he also had a number of enemies, some of which he probably helped contrive himself. So that's part of his story too. He's not a saint, but go back and listen to some of the material. It's pretty fascinating stuff. anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up.
And what's the permaculture maxim about living beneath your?
Oh yeah, in permaculture they say, "Be rich, live beneath your means."
I like that.
Yeah.
Certainly is in contrast to max out your credit cards and keep up with the Joneses, right?
Yeah.
Right, and people feel like they have no other choices. And in certain instances, they don't. If you want an education, or if you wanted an official education, which is an indoctrination, not really an education anymore.
Yeah.
I think there are other places to get them now. I think everything's going to be extra state. Anything real is going to have to be outside. I think that's kind of what Nietsche is pointing to, that anything is real has got to go outside of it. You got to jump through the window. You got to do something. You're not going to find anything real within the arms of the cold monster.
Escape from their foul stench.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we have 2 sentences left.
We're right at the end. So there, where the state ends, there only begins the man who is not superfluous. There begins the song of the necessary, the single, and the irreplaceable melody. So this irreplaceable melody is something that comes up with the pre-Socratics and resounding the original note of our civilization. So when these pre-Socratics went into their incubation state and they met with the god or the goddess and brought back the laws, that was the beginning of Western civilization. And it was started from a sacred origin, which I think most people don't have any concept that Western civilization had sacred origin, but it was co-opted. And so to resound now is called for. It's the clarion call is to resound that original note and bring it back in its purity without the dross. So, and actually in the Bhagavad Gita, they talk about that with the, it's not the Gita, it's in the Upanishads, about the Udgita. So the word Gita means song or chant. And there's a designation for each hour of the day with its own chant. And when you get to noon, it's the loud chant. It's the Udgita. And that's what's called for right now we need to resound that original loud chant and make it louder than the din of war and the din of commercialism and the din of sickness and death. So we have to sing louder and just re-sing that note. There, where the state ends, look there, my brothers. Do you not see it, the rainbow and the bridges of the overman, what he calls the Übermensch?
Mm-hmm.
Thus spoke Zarathustra. That's it.
Yeah, so it's really only once you leave the state behind, jump through the window, that you can, in this instance, he's talking about a form of at least transcending it, getting beyond it. And he sees it as a rainbow as opposed to the stenches. And I don't have, like I said, I haven't read a lot of him, but, there is always talking about this possibility, and much of the writers, they were talking about self-actualization, things like that. They're all trying to find a way to raise the level of the human understanding and consciousness at a certain point. And that was his way, the Overman. It's very much like Dostoevsky's writings, especially, and it was always this trying to get past the stultifying laws of the state, mm-hmm. And of course in Dostoevsky, it manifests in kind of bizarre ways, like Notes from the Underground, where the character, all he wants to do, he's passing this captain, this stuffy soldier every day. All he wants to do is just bump him as he's going by, just to nudge him in the slightest way. And the whole book is this lead up to him trying to nudge, getting up the courage, to do this incredibly, for him, defiant act, right, and nudge this guy just in passing.
And who was the guy he wants to nudge?
It was like a captain, just some stuffy representative of the military state, Dostoevsky was brilliant.
Absolutely. Wasn't he like an epileptic? Didn't he have like some kind of neurological thing going on?
I don't remember. I do know that he was arrested, and they kept him for a number of days, and they just pulled him out, brought him in front of a firing squad, and pulled the guns open, and then just said, forget about it, go home.
Wow.
So that might engender a little change in you.
Yeah.
But so that's really one of the only few biographical facts I know about Dostoevsky. So, and I don't know whether that was before. I don't know where that was, in his great novels, whether that was before
or
after.
Yeah. Well, cool. So there's a companion piece to this that we wanted to get into, and that is this whole kind of Steiner kind of wing that you wanted to talk about, Steve. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's been going on for a while.
Let's get into it. By the way, you're listening to Steve and Krys Crimi from Logosophia Books, who are guests of the show on the final Friday of every month. It's one of my favorite times to actually get on and broadcast, is to hang out with Steve and Krys. So I guess we're going to get into some of the Steinerian things, right?
Right. Well, would you rather? Yeah. So I can talk a little bit about Easter being this weekend. Would you rather have that instead of, because go ahead.
Is the Steiner stuff long and dense? I mean, are we going to go on a journey? I'm okay with that. I mean, I'd like to.
All right. We'll just run through
dive
it.
in.
All right.
Yeah.
So apparently Steiner went and got hold of Nietzsche's library through his sister. I think he had died. Nietzsche died in 1900. It was kind of about the time that Steiner was doing his talks, and I don't want to get.
And for people who don't know, Rudolf Steiner is the founder of anthroposophy and the Waldorf schools, and was a mystic. He was a really interesting character, and he got kicked out of Germany, right, by Hitler.
He didn't actually. He probably got killed by Hitler. That's the general story.
Okay.
Is that he was poisoned in something around 25, and I guess so he was originally part of the Theosophical movement, and then he kind of started his own thing because he ended up being his argument was, I guess they were bringing along Krishnamurti as a young boy as the sort of the second coming.
He was the world savior. Yeah.
And he did, and even Krishnamurti wasn't into it.
Right.
So he split with them at that point, I think, and started anthroposophy, which is the study of the human, the anthros. Mm-hmm. And so he just gave many, many lectures. He certainly had a lot of what we would call spiritual insight. He was a visionary. He founded biodynamics sort of towards the end of his life. I think he died in 1925. Mm-hmm. But he was also very grounded. He had a political system that people are still working with, and I think maybe that's what scared the Hitler and that whole cadre the most. The fact that he would have a political system, based on some sort of spiritual insight as opposed to power. As he had a form of dance, form of painting that he came up with. He was all over the place. He had a very full life, gave hundreds and hundreds of lectures, most of which are transcribed. There's a pretty nice archive of his lectures that I guess it's RS Archive, I think. And you can just type in any topic. I agree with him on a lot of things. I don't necessarily agree with him on certain other things, and that's just the way it is. But one of the things, but he also talked a lot about this time being really critical. This time, early 21st century, sorry. Mm-hmm. Critical in that, so he was very much of an evolutionist, spiritual evolutionist, and his part of his scheme, without getting too far into it, was that it was going to happen anyway. So a certain type of movement is going to happen anyway, but it's really important whether it's done consciously or not. Mm-hmm. So we could move up, and it could be sort of imposed on us, and it's just not the same as if we're making sort of strivings in the spiritual realms to to work out our stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So he thought that this was going to be a really critical time. One of the things that he predicted was the fall of the honeybee, all the problems that would be going on with that. And another thing that he talked about were that there'd be these certain deceptions by what he would call these spiritual beings. And the two main ones, he used the name of Ahriman and Lucifer. And I'll get into who they were to Steiner, so it's not the Lucifer of the Catholic Church, whether you think Lucifer runs the Catholic Church or runs from the Catholic Church. I think it's the former most likely. Mm-hmm. So the Ahriman and Lucifer are emblematic of two forces. And the easiest way to talk about these two forces, one going up towards the light, one going down towards the ground, towards stability, towards the four directions of the world.
And the plants.
So, right.
The plants follow that.
Right. So the easiest example to see is you plant a seed in the ground, it moves in two directions. All right. Science calls it phototropism and geotropism, right? So the root movement going down is geotropism. The movement going up is called phototropism. So these are two incredibly important formative forces. Humans do it. Any living thing grows by those particular forces, right? Or you can call it gravity and levity. But for Steiner, he called what he did spiritual science. So it's not just science. So it's just like, well, these things just follow the light. Well, he saw the world, all these aspects of the world as sort of combinations and amalgamations of spiritual beings that we would call them, fairies, gnomes, elementals, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So there's one for each of the elements. So these are the two sort of formative forces, and they're natural. They're just part of living on this planet. So then, you extrapolate further. Mm-hmm. He also saw Ahriman. It's interesting to talk about Ahriman because Ahriman, we just talked about. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Right? Zarathustra was Zoroaster, and Ahriman was the Zoroastrian deity. Was the sort of the bad guy for Zoroaster. Ahriman, and the good guy was Ahura Mazda.
Ahura Mazda was the god of light.
So, but Steiner took Ahriman as this sort of manifestation of this force down into the physical, and in particular, he thought that North America was sort of ground zero for Ahriman. So that the United States is, and it's kind of proven out to be true, is sort of the emblematic, the flagship station for the physicalization of everything.
Materialism, right?
Exactly. So that's one movement. The other movement is what he would call Luciferian, and Lucifer means light. Being of light. Mm-hmm. So in the original form, so Lucifer really that's a whole other story. But Satan was always God's, in a way, God's messenger to test people.
Right.
Hasatan in the book of Job, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Lucifer. So the Luciferian movement, this movement of that the plant say grows upward, is emblematic in, say, the New Age movement. So the New Age movement, we're all beings of light, we're all light workers. I don't have to pay attention to anything that's going down on the ground. It hurts my head to think about these things. Or run
away from learning.
Yeah. I don't need to know all that. Everything's love and light and happiness.
Right.
Kumbaya.
Right.
So Lucifer is the being that kind of pulls people in that direction. Right? Ahriman, it would pull people in the other direction. There is no God. It's only the state.
Pure science.
And you just got to deal with this shit.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things Steiner said about this time period would that be that these beings would be so powerful, Lucifer and Ahriman, that they would be forming deceptions. So there would be Ahriman, that people would be actually, one of the things I think he said was that people would have, apparent psychic abilities, but it would be a deception from Ahriman or from Lucifer. So that there would be these sort of false, whatever you want to call them, archonic entities or things like that, that would be making people think that they were talking to actual deities or positive beings.
Right.
And to also bring out the balance between these two movements is depicted for him would be the Christos, would be the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So Christ is the one that holds that balance in the heart, away from the head, away from the lower chakra, so that balance, and that's why the cross is right at the heart.
And it comes out of the Vesica Pisces.
Right. And then the vice Vesica Pisces, which is the fish symbol for the early Christians, is the overlapping of two circles.
Mm-hmm.
Christ inhabits in many especially medieval art in the cathedrals, he inhabits that space.
Which is a portal.
Which is a portal, which is a womb.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and even the cross, you can see, is the dissection of the Vesica Pisces is the upright part of the cross, and then the horizontal part is across the middle of the Vesica.
Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. And the cross, of course, it's also the what they call the immanent and the transcendent.
Right.
So it's the we are the cross. We are as humans, we are the intersection of the immanent, of the spiritual, and of the transcendent, the material, which is really it's the cause of all our problems. It's just trying to deal with all these aspects of us.
Right.
But we are both. We are both, and that's to understand that and to live that in an enlightened way is to have the Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Right.
Yep. So what I'm seeing going on at the moment is it seems to be that there's a serious deception going on. Well, it's possible. Let's just say I think it's possible because I don't know for sure.
In my opinion.
It's still confusing. That there is an Ahrimanic deception and a Luciferic deception going on.
Right now in current time.
Right now.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I think was predicted by Steiner.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ahrimanic deception will be really quick about is this idea. There's something that's called the event that a number of people have been talking about, and what has happened is
that would be Luciferic.
Luciferic, did I say Ahrimanic?
I'm
sorry, Luciferic. So taking us out of the reality of the world.
Right,
so,
like the ascension or something like that.
Right. Mm-hmm. So it's a form of the ascension.
An escape.
Yes, a form of the rapture. But in recently, a whole bunch of stuff has been coming out about these people many of whom would do Dolores Cannon's hypnosis work, and they would they would go through sessions, and after the sessions, they would ask their higher selves of whoever they're doing the sessions with questions, not necessarily having to do with their session. And these questions end up leading to a number of people and a number of therapists talking. These higher selves were talking about some sort of event that's supposed to come, supposed to, and then they would say, "Oh, when?" Well, soon. And they kept on trying to narrow it down, and it seemed like many of them, not all, but many of them said it was going to happen within the first quarter of this year. Which is what we got 2 days left, I guess, 3 days left, right? So there's that, but it also came from a number of different quarters also that we were hearing people talking about the same thing, that there's going to be this light from the center of the cosmos that's going to wash the earth. And depending on who you talk to, it's either going to be, a little bit of a spiritual awakening or a big spiritual awakening. But these people are really talking about this full-blown movement into the fourth or fifth dimension, where all of a sudden we were going to become light beings. Most of the planet couldn't handle it, and there were these spaceships out there that were going to be like these hospital ships to take the people who couldn't take it and send them back. I mean, it's even on and on and on. But it's just the interesting thing about it is not so much the individual things, but the fact that there were so many of them.
So many people having the same kind of projection or presentation.
Right.
Same vision.
Right. So that indicates to me two things. Either one, it's real.
Right.
Or two, there's something
going
informing all these people.
Right.
So you're getting, so in other words, to take any of the new age sort of, because there are a lot of people who are, you know, also trying to find what's real, what's really going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is to pull them out. Well, we don't have to worry about this stuff anymore because I'm just going to get zapped with cosmic light. I'm going to be clairvoyant, and we're all going to be, you know, living happily in this sort of fourth dimensional, you know, semi material world, however they describe it. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing a strong possibility that is a Luciferic deception being pulled on a lot of people.
Right.
Especially because when you hear people talk about it, they talk about it in very emotional, I can't wait. Oh, it's coming, you know. Believe me, I understand it. You know, there's an attraction to it.
Yeah, sure.
But so that's one. So that's the Luciferic deception.
Right.
Simultaneously, I see an harmonic deception. Now, the harmonic deception is a deception, you know, within the physical material, and it's, you know, and I've been just wondering whether the Q phenomenon is that.
Right.
And these, because what it seems to me to be doing, again, is leading people down a particular path, you know, and everything. So this Q critter or critters is just telling people basically what to investigate. Right. You know, so whereas a year ago people were just investigating, you know, the stuff, finding stuff and investigating it. Mm-hmm. But Q has dominated the rap for for a while now.
Right.
Since what was, I guess it was October. It was October of last year.
Yeah.
And then, but now, and I don't know whether because we have Mars about to conjunct Saturn, right? Or it's probably close enough, right, to
about a degree off right about now. Yeah.
Oh,
so that's basically, yes. So there's all this martial activity between the various Q factions.
Right.
So all the people who are interpreting Q. And so, you know, we were away for a few days, and, you know, you go away for like 4 days and you just feel like, you know, you got to get back onto a whole new world again,
like 4 hours.
I know.
So we're trying to figure out what's going on. And to honest with you, nobody's making sense. Absolutely nobody. And they're all accusing, I mean, and it has gotten to the point where it's not like, you know, I disagree with you. You know, one guy is calling Jerome, Robert Davis, he's a buffoon and a moron, and this guy's an idiot. And so it's gotten to this ad hominem thing, where they're just going after each other. So, you know, and nobody wins with that. You know, there's no dialogue.
Right.
So this is a combination of Mercury retrograde, I guess, with the Saturn and Mars conjunction, that they're going after each other. So that's on top of this, and maybe this is what's, you know, maybe the deception is unfolding, is I guess what I would hope for. That, but it ends up being that. So, you know, so this Q is trying to posit these white hats versus black hats. Mm-hmm. White hat is supposed to be, you know, Trump and this sort of cadre of military people.
Right.
You know, but then at the same time, Trump is doing, you know, other than the fact that we think, we've seen a certainly number of pedophile arrests.
Yes, a number. You
know, and we don't know whether these, you know, whatever these supposed, 12,000, 15,000 sealed indictments are in actuality. I don't know whether that's another deception or not either, to tell you the truth.
Right.
But they're still sealed indictments. But you still got, you know, everybody's still in the game. There's nobody that's not in the game anymore except maybe Ray, you know, the FBI director, you know, and really all he did was lose his pension. Like, that's going to stop him from writing a book.
Right.
And Comey, I guess.
Yeah.
And it looks like they may be throwing Zuckerberg under the bus too.
It's getting close to that, isn't it?
You know,
sure is.
That's a possibility. So, you know, on one hand, maybe certain things are unraveling, but the other hand, like I said, this could be, the whole Q thing could be an harmonic deception. So it's another deception to lead people from actually doing, you know, figuring out for themselves what to investigate, what to find out, because now they're just fighting each other.
Right.
You know, Q is this, Q is that, you know, Q is real, Q is, it's not, you know, because the question isn't whether Q is real, the question is what's the intent behind it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Right. And there are other like Qs, like there's Mega Anon, and there's that Arthur character, and, you know, and they're all kind of fighting for this prominence around who's got the inside track on the inside baseball.
Right.
And it's, it's a really interesting set of analogies that you've come up with, because one theoretically resolves the chaos of the planet, the chaos of the system, corruption, has a little built-in redemption factor, and then the other takes us out of the situation completely. It's really, really fascinating stuff.
Well, it's nice to have some kind of a framework, a structure within which you can have a clear understanding of how things are being operated or how things work. So you have some kind of a blueprint that you can hang it on.
I mean, this goes back to why study mythology? Why study, because we've lost mythological thinking, we've lost symbolic thinking. In fact, our symbolic thinking it's been another aversion, right? They've taken all the symbols that actually meant something, like the cross, like the pyramid, all these things, and they've just turned them away from the ability to use. They were we call them packed thought forms. They're all the whole idea of having a symbol is to have it encapsulate and hold and carry for you a whole number of meanings, you know, like a great poem, you know, there's a particular word there, and the whole poem rests on that word. So one of the things that has been drummed out of us is the ability to think symbolically, think mythologically. So have these sort of tools. I mean, you use the myth, to come to an understanding of what's going on now, because it's all alive.
Because really there's nothing new under the sun. So these frameworks are helpful to human beings, that this is just a repetitive pattern. And once you can recognize the pattern, then you know how to deal with it, which I think is important for, you know, you had wanted to talk about solutions on these days that we get together. And I think before you can talk about solutions, in permaculture, they say you really need to list what the problems are before you can even think about the solutions. And you have to have a clear understanding of where you're at on your property.
Right.
What are the aspects coming in from the sun, the wind, the rain, the noise levels, and so on. You need to know these vectors that come in from off your site. So like fire vector, wind vector, sound vectors. And then once you've gathered all your information, then you write out your plan and you do your diagrams for your architectural drawings for how you're.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So kind of pursuant to what you're sharing about mythology, I think you also wanted to talk a little bit about Easter and sort of the energy around Easter and then Good Friday, and you kind of want to roll that into what we're talking about here?
I'll tell you, I can mention a couple of things about that. And I kind of, just because everyone kind of knows the basic story. One of the interesting things that is Easter and Christmas. Now, Christmas is fixed to a particular day.
Right.
That's more, and it's, 4 days after the solstice, or 1 day after the sun begins to move back, actually. And that's kind of the earth-centered, because it's fixed. Now, the Easter is more cosmic because its date is, I don't know if I can remember, but it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the equinox. Is Easter Sunday. So Easter Sunday has to do with the moon and the equinox. So it's a movable date,
Right.
and thus more connected cosmically
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to the cosmos. So
Right.
that's an interesting distinction between the two, the two main holidays of Christianity. And this is being broadcast on Good Friday,
Mm-hmm.
which of course, very interestingly, was one of the few holidays the Teamsters get. I was a Teamster for a very brief while, and
Right.
we had Good Friday off.
My father was a Teamster.
Was he?
Long time Teamster, yeah.
Hmm.
He used to get the AFL-CIO magazine sent to our house.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time seeing, this is a long time ago, Jimmy Hoffa was on the cover.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
But it was like the shape of a parking garage?
No, not quite. It was pre-Aramonic. Yeah.
So I was working on an estate, and the guy I had to join his company. And he painted the bridges in New York City.
Interesting. So we have Easter being a specific day, which is after the first full moon after the equinox. Now Sunday is the full moon.
Right. So if it's the actual. Right, so I don't know. Yes, it's the same day this year, right?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. So I guess if it somehow it works that way, yeah. So that would make Easter right, because that makes it relatively early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. If it was like a few weeks, usually it's somewhere within April.
It's usually somewhere in April,
but it can be in May also.
Yeah, that's a late Easter, definitely.
So that's just a basic idea of how the two holidays. One is more or less cosmic. But
right.
The understanding, and a lot of this goes back to Steiner, is that so there's a traditional 3-day initiation. You go back to even the pharaohs in the pyramid. There's that sarcophagus in the king's chamber, and basically what would happen would be the pharaoh or whoever the initiate was would be in the chamber, and there was the skylights, usually connecting to Orion or Sirius, and the priesthood would would sort of protect the body while the soul of the pharaoh or the initiate would go out and make the cosmic connections. So Steiner's take on it, is that what Christ did was he did the same 3-day initiation. But he did it one in historical time, and he did it externally. He did it in front of everyone as a being on the planet, not and not in the. So according to Steiner, so this was a big shift, and his whole thing is that the crucifixion on Good Friday on Golgotha was sort of, the linchpin about which the whole past and future revolves.
Mm-hmm.
So I call him Golgotha-centric. And so the crucifixion is where that happens. So Christ dies on Good Friday. Then Saturday, there's what's called in Catholicism, they call it the harrowing of hell. And the Catholic tradition is that Christ goes down and opens up the gates of hell for all the souls running from Adam on down the line who were good, but since they didn't have the opportunity to believe in Christ, because Christ is in the future, didn't quite make it to heaven.
So would that have been limbo and not hell?
They had another name for it. Limbo, I don't think you get out of limbo. Limbo is like nice, but technically limbo is nice, but you don't get to see God.
Right. So this is different.
I guess it was a form of limbo.
Okay.
So that's the tradition, but within that tradition, of course, Christ's job, which goes to Augustine, and I completely disagree with this, was to redeem original sin for people, which of course is still not redeemed. And what's original sin? Well, because Augustine was a drunk, and And apparently, once he recovered himself, he hated himself and decided that since he was a sinner, everyone else must be too. So he runs it back to expulsion from Eden. So the original sin for him is the expulsion of Eden for disobeying Yahweh, who I don't think is the real creator God. I'm more with the Gnostics on this, that Yahweh is a demiurge.
I'd agree. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So, where was I? So you...
The harrowing of hell.
So
he goes down, and he's bringing the people back up.
So he redeems his original sin, supposedly, but we still, of course, have original sin according to the doctrine. And it was something that we encountered this past weekend at a wedding. That these particular group of Christians were very much involved in talking about being sinners. I'm not going into details.
Okay.
But that was so much a part of who they were, was being sinners, and it's just really sad.
Wow.
It's really sad. So so the sin was on one hand, it was supposedly this disobedience, and what was disobedience was that they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Yahweh says, expels them because now you are like us. Talk about the plural again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now Yahweh says, now you are like us. That's how we can get out of town.
And where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise.
Right. I mean, my life is one big folly after another. As it's just Folly Beach. So so anyway, but to me, what that really is a distortion of the fact that we're cut off from our divine origins. There's something Empedocles talked about, a lot of the ancient Greeks talked about. That, that's what it's not a sin, but it's the fact that we're cut off from our divine origins.
Right.
We drink the lethe.
Avidya.
And we're not knowing, and this is what we have in our lives to return to.
Right.
Of course, certain groups get stuck on the Good Friday part. The fact that it's just a sin, or Jesus died for our sins, et cetera, and all I have to do is believe that Good Friday part. Mm-hmm. Well, the harrowing of hell, and I'll just say one more thing about the harrowing of hell. So for Steiner, it's the cosmic Christ that comes into being at this point, right? And the Christos enters into the center of the earth. Mm-hmm. And revitalizes the center of the earth and joins with it.
So the physical earth.
So that the spiritual Christ, the cosmic Christ, permeates all of our being.
Beautiful.
Okay, that's my understanding, or at least my take on it.
So it's like a recapitulation of the spiritual and physical, the alchemical wedding. So the revitalizing that, renewing that contract.
Yes.
That's like
the
resounding the original note.
Yeah, and so Christ always talked about the new covenant.
And this Sunday is also April Fool's Day
at
the same time, which is very rare where the two occur together. And the Fool is the 0 card in the tarot.
Mm.
So that's everything and nothing. It's the Alpha and the Omega.
Mm.
So interesting day this Sunday.
Right. So with the full with a full moon.
Yeah, with a full moon. Right, Libra opposite Moon in Aries, or Sun in Aries rather, and it's going to be an interesting time. A lot of T-squares going off. Sunday could be that energy's kicking in. That energy's kicking in right about tomorrow through Saturday, Sunday, and even Monday. So we're looking at really about a 4-day window here. My estimation, not just one day.
Yeah.
About a 4
right, that sounds right.
Oh, definitely, it's happening already. I was just curious, where is Mercury now? Because
it's retrograding, and let me look at the ephemeris. Take me a second here.
Just because I'm just curious, because it just feels like it's a very combative, communication or lack of communication that's going on.
You got that right. So Mercury's at 20 degrees. 14 degrees, 20 minutes in Aries retrograde.
In Aries.
In Aries.
Yeah, in Aries. Yeah, Jupiter is also retrograde, and Saturn will shortly be retrograde. It's got to get up to 9 degrees. It stations at 9 degrees, and it's at 8:50:21 now. So Saturn's real close to going retrograde.
So how long will that stay retrograde?
Oh, Saturn's retrograde until I think September.
Yeah, I would think it would be a long, drawn out.
It's a long, long retrograde. It goes all the way back to 2 degrees. So if anybody's got planets that are between like 2 and 9 degrees, get ready to be worked a little bit with Saturn. It'll do its magic. It'll wear down the resistance.
So anything with a sharp edge is good.
It's the sandpaper.
A big eraser,
right?
Yeah.
Of our egos in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So that's just a few thoughts on just another take on Easter, at least a sort of like a spiritual take, or
that's great. I love it.
Something else to look at within those within those realms. That it is this sort of at least Steiner saw it as this new external initiation.
Mm-hmm.
That was possible for everybody, and again, for him, you have to do it yourself. It's not, all I gotta do is believe, and it's done.
Upon you. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's another possibility because the old initiation ways are gone.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about it.
It's true.
It's either that or get initiated by the state.
Yeah.
Or to be the state, really.
Yeah. So this has been great. Thank you. Thank you. Missed you guys, and really great connecting in at a high level of conversation. And I know that the people that listen to the stream and the podcast, they dig you, and so this is always a great time to connect at the end of the month. You can find Steve and Krys's books at Logosophia Press. And what's the website?
It's logosophiabooks.com, LOGOSOPHIA, books, BOOKS.com, and you can see even on our title, we have the Logos and the Sophia, the divine masculine and feminine, together. I mean, that was an
the word of wisdom.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, hey, thanks again. And we'll see both of you next month at the end of the month. And I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Robert.
You're quite welcome. Always so much fun to have this three-way conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, all right, we're back in real time. It was Steve and Krys Crimi. Do I have my microphone up? Yeah, there it is. We're back in real time. That was a great conversation, wasn't it? Really good one. Juicy. Hey, so apparently now we're up to 11 businesses, corporations that are pulling their sponsorship from Fox and Laura Ingraham because she took on David Hogg. I just, while the interview was playing, I did happen to use the opportunity to tweet the CEO of Wayfair and Expedia and TripAdvisor to tell them I'm never going to use their products again. I unsubscribed from Wayfair's newsletter. And if you, this isn't necessarily about Laura Ingraham. Okay, I'm not a huge Laura Ingraham fan or supporter. I mean, she's on Fox. She tends to be more right of center, and I think has a fairly good take most of the time. I have this wild theory that she's actually a man. But that shouldn't factor into any of what I'm about to share with you. I did what I did because I am anti David Hogg. And I don't care what people think or say. I'm anti David Hogg. I'm anti the Parkland Six. I'm anti the March for Our Lives movement because it is a bum rush towards our Second Amendment rights. And more importantly, let's get beyond the Second Amendment. We're in Orwellian territory here because there isn't even the ability to debate because these kids are like human shields. And it's a very clever way to shut down our ability to speak, our ability to think, connect the two up, and share what we're thinking and speaking. Because it is okay in their world if they can say whatever they want. But if you challenge them, you cannot have the same kind of leverage, and you cannot have the same kind of social access. And this goes beyond, this transcends David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez and Cameron Kasky. This actually interpenetrates this whole dynamic. You bring something up that is questioning, doubting, countering, you're hateful. You're hateful, you're spiteful, you're a fascist. Just that's how the conversation has been determined. There's only one group who has the ability to speak freely. Again, I'm not a huge fan of Milo Yiannopoulos. I'm not. But when Milo went to Berkeley, even though it was self-aggrandizing in many ways, he should have had the right to speak. And the whole thing was shut down. And that was really a precursor to where we are, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. Man, I tell you, this David Hogg thing is getting my blood pressure up, I have to say. And you know what? That's okay. It's all right. It's a call to practice some self-maintenance and care. But it's important. This thing has got to be shut down. It's got to be shut down because we're at a real tipping point here. And it's not even the fact that we'll have our quote-unquote Second Amendment rights pulled from us. It's the fact that we're in an ongoing soft target war around the freedom of expression and the freedom of speech. So I'm going to be exploring some asymmetric ways to deal with this. Because the only way that we are going to have any kind of impact and effect is through going at this knot, this Gordian knot at an angle. Okay? So I'm also open to your suggestions. You know, what you think we should do to get engaged and really turn the tide on what's being programmed for us and shoved down our throats. One of the things that maybe we could take a few pages out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Take these people outside of their areas of expertise, number one. And number two, Alinsky was very keen on ad hominem attacks and character smears. Now, that's difficult because theoretically these kids are kids, but they're not really kids. They're not really kids. So we have to be careful. I'll tell you what, when Monday rolls around, I'll have some ideas that we could throw out there. At the very least, this is fun. We can turn this thing into a game. It's a game that's played at really high stakes at this point in time. Hey, so if you're interested, I have some new content that's available. I have a new post up on the generational revolutionary arc, or the arc of the revolution through the bottom part of the chart, through houses 2, 3, 4, and 5, soon to be 6. It's up on robertphoenix.com. And I have a new interview up over at Regina Meredith's website, reginameredith.com. So there are 2 opportunities for you to dip into content. And you get an opportunity every single day here with me and the guests I bring on, like Steve and Krys. If you feel like donating, I do have the option of donating. I've not set up a Patreon like pretty much everybody else that does this correctly. But if you go to my website, robertphoenix.com, and you feel like you want to donate some Federal Reserve notes, I do take Bitcoin, and I do take Litecoin, which is tanking. But if you feel like doing that, you can go over to my website, robertphoenix.com. I have a PayPal button on the right-hand side of my website. If you feel like donating to the cause, I'm always open to donations and grateful. All right, so why don't we wrap it up on this Good Friday? And that last part, when Steve was talking about Good Friday and essentially the descent into hell, and then Sunday, Easter Sunday, it's pretty interesting stuff. So let's all meditate a little bit on peace this weekend to the best of our abilities. I think the world could use it. And then maybe on Monday we come out swinging. All right. That's it. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to shape what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thank you for tuning in on the Friday FARcast. Again, thanks to my guests, Steve and Krys Crimi. And I'll be back on Sunday nights.